well. Let's
Okay.
go to the one on Ezekiel 16, because that's the one I really want to get to. Yeah,
Let's
I
do
didn't
it.
get to have a lot of time to cover what I wanted into the debate, so this will be great to cover more because I got a lot of stuff to say on Ezekiel 16.
Okay, with regards to the Bible not giving an age, again, I'll go to Ezekiel 16 really quickly here. For example, it talks about God compares Jerusalem to his wife and says, and you grew up and became tall and arrived at full adornment. Your breasts were formed. Okay, again, according to the midwifery and women's health nurse practitioner, that does not happen until 17 when the breasts have been fully formed in a girl. And scholars like Robert Alter, Mark Rucker, Rolf Alexander all note this is talking about after puberty. So God is sort of setting the standard that sex or lovemaking comes a period even after puberty, because it says that God even passed by her again after the breasts had fully formed. So there's another period of waiting. And again, this is what I can see from scholars like Peter Gentry, Andrew Mine, T.M. Lemma, Stephen Wellham, David Gundel, Ralph Alexander, Robert Alter. All of them are pointing to this. And I'm out of time. Thank you.
Yeah, you're not only out of time, you're also out of your depth. So let's break down Jones's deception and poor research. He essentially makes three main arguments regarding Ezekiel 16, 7 through 8, and the...
Now, I was wondering at first, is he attempting to deceive, or is he just a bad researcher? But then he fixes it at the end of the video by saying something like, just to be clear, he's got poor research, but then he does deceive too. On top of that, he wants it to make sure that you're a bad researcher and deceptive.
Yeah, it's funny with these Muslims. They're such a chest beating culture. You just can't disagree. They got to try to do all sorts of character assassination tactics for to make you to be this horrible evil person over disagreements on interpreting passages. You're like, wow, you guys really emotionally insecure about this kind of stuff, aren't you?
Like, this is an indefensible position in my opinion, but I would still appreciate someone taking this position first, come out and just say, and maybe Daniel did, I don't think so, I don't remember this, but just say, look, I realize at the jump that this sounds absurd, but just hang with me and I'm going to try to give you some reason, at least an approach like that instead of the bombastic, look, IP is just an idiot for thinking this way. That kind of, not that anyone said that, but that sort of vibe. All right, shall we keep trucking?
It's funny because in the last video you said I was clever and wise, but now I'm just a bad researcher. And the guy just contradicts himself constantly.
Of marriage that is mentioned therein. 1, the passage refers to, quote, full development of the mammary glands, i.e. the breasts in females. 2, that this full development only occurs around age 17. 3, that God married the girl only after she had completed puberty. The conclusion thus appears to be that the age of marriage in the Bible is around age 17, which pretty much agrees with modern standards, which generally set ages 16 through 18 as the appropriate minimum age for marriage, depending on the country. What a coincidence. But is this how Jews and Christians have historically interpreted Ezekiel 16? Notice how Jones only cited modern scholars. As we will see, there is a reason for that, and Jones is desperately trying to hide it. Here is what Ezekiel 16, 7 through 8 states. The girl arrived at full adornment, and her breasts had formed. But notice the other trait that Jones conveniently omitted in his eisegesis. The girl's hair also grew. It is a consensus among scholars that this is referring to body hair and specifically her pubic hair, which, as is well known, only grows at the onset of puberty. According to Moshe Greenberg, in his Anchor Yale Bible commentary on Ezekiel, the verse is referring to the signs of puberty, namely breast growth and body hair. Notice also the close parallel between the verse and a Sumerian marriage poem. In both cases, they refer to the growing of breasts and pubic hair. We should also notice that the verse says nothing about full development of breasts. Jones just made this up.
All right, you can pause it now.
Why are you making stuff up, Jones?
Well, I didn't. So you got to look at the way these words are used in the Hebrew. So, when it says you grew up, this that verb there is used in Jonah 4:10 to refer to the fully grown tree that covered Jonah. It wasn't just partially. Genesis 25, it refers to when the boys grew up. Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob became a quiet man. So it refers to them becoming adults. This thing about breasts fully formed, where I'm getting that from, again, look at the way the verb is used. Okay, again, in Ezekiel 40:43, it refers to hooks that have been fully installed, Ezekiel 7:14 refers to be fully prepared for battle, not partially. So again, based in how these words are used, it tends to refer to something that is a completed type process. And again, this is what. Go ahead.
I was trying to think of the word kun, maybe in Hebrew. I think it's like firmly established, carries with it that sense of. And as far as I know, and my Hebrew's trash, folks, so don't bank too much on this. But of course, the reason why, as far as I understand, the reason why we have were formed and had grown, and I guess they would do that in the same with, when they're translating similar Semitic languages and stuff. It's Hebrew is in the perfect tense, and so when it's past time, they'll add, had or were or something like that. Whereas if it's present time perfect tense, it's has, because the way you translate it. So you're dealing with these perfect tenses, but if it's past time perfect tense in Hebrew always carries with it the sense of completion anyway, right?
It can.
So,
it can. It really depends on context, and scholars debate about this per passage.
Well, sure, but when you look at this context, it's coming back to, after this process. And so I would think that in context, when I passed you again and saw you, after breasts had been, were formed, had grown, talking about pubic hair, it seems to me that it does have the context itself does bear out this sense of completedness by the time the second passing happens.
Wait a minute.
Well,
Wait a minute.
But again, not a Hebrew scholar.
Your Hebrew is trash. Another reason why Christianity is inferior. Because Jonathan Pritchett's Hebrew is trash, Christianity is inferior. I just want everyone to know that's the
even though John Walton's Hebrew is not trash. How does that
John Walton's a beast. But Pritchett, there's so many scholars that agree with you. I mean, Mark Rooker says in Holman Old Testament commentary on Ezekiel, after she had matured beyond puberty, God spread the corner of his garment over her nakedness. Robert Alter says the infant girl has passed puberty. Ralph H. Alexander in Ezekiel, the Expositor's Bible commentary, under his gracious care, Jerusalem grew to full maturity as a city. David Gundel in Before You Get Engaged says Ezekiel 16 suggests that a marriageable age came somewhere after puberty. Peter Gentry and Stephen Wellum say in God's Kingdom Through God's Covenants, much later after puberty, God passes by a second time and sees a young woman ready for adornment in marriage. Andrew Mine in Ezekiel in the Ethics of the Exile says others have suggested that it's menstrual blood since the girl has passed puberty. T.M. Lemos says in Violence and Personhood in Ancient Israel that girls were married at or after puberty is the impression one gets from Ezekiel 16. Okay, in the Life Application Study Bible, New American Bible, they say this message reminded Jerusalem of its former despised status among the Canaanite nations, using the imagery of a young baby growing to mature womanhood. God reminded her that he raised her up. You can also see similar things in the New Interpreter Study Bible, New Revised Standard Version with Apocrypha. Just me doing a quick survey of the scholars and things they've written about, scholars, theologians, they all tend to say this is referring to when she's ready for lovemaking. It's after puberty. It's after these processes. The hair has grown. The breast has grown. She's at full adornment. All of these have been completed. So yeah, this is what this is basically.
And then the coming
showing.
back to it thing, it just like we've said, that just adds all the more to it. I think coming back later. So I don't know. Your narrative there, your explanation doesn't. It may be what all these scholars that you have there say, but it doesn't fit the narrative apparently that we're trying to go for, I guess. But let's keep trucking.
Assume for a second that this is what the verse really meant. How would an ancient audience have known exactly when breasts had fully developed? Did the Jewish rabbis perhaps have come to an agreement as to when that was? Not at all. In fact, they were all agreed that the verse was referring to a much earlier time than age 17. The Talmud mentions some of the different opinions. Nida 47 mentions 3 opinions, none of which mention anything about full development. It also records
pause it there. The breast grows sufficiently so that a fold appears below the breast. Okay, this is I have rarely seen girls 12, 13 like this. Like typically it's referring to, look, they have sufficient, you wait for a time for them to grow. So This is working against him. This is not something that you see at the onset of puberty, like 12 or 13. So he's talking about breast sag on the next line. Like, how? So, yeah, they probably didn't know the exact age, but if you, again, read Michael Satlow's book, they had to wait for a time after there was maturity. Average age Jewish women in this time period were marrying in Palestine, late teens, early 20s. Amram Troper says the same thing in his paper. So, again, this is just nonsense.
Let's stop and remember, this is a problem that I typically run into just as a professor when you talk to people. Let's remember what we're reading in the Talmud, the time period, 200 to 500 CE, A lot of people think, and they get confused about what's going on in the Bible, as if Hebrew thought in the Exodus is the same as Hebrew thought in captivity or during the time of David, or that Hebrew thought was the same in the first century as it was at different centuries throughout, like it never changes. That's false, right?
Yeah.
You will get lost. And so by the time you get to the Talmud writers, what they are talking about within categories that are post-proliferation of Hellenism, even if they're writing in Hebrew, right? I mean, you can't unring that bell, right? That's already happened. And so they also have their own, a whole set of ways that they exegete the scripture, if they're even interested in the point of any of these passages at all, and all of their arguments and stuff. So I'm always skeptical when you have any sort of commentary, going back and say, well, these are what, as if Hebrew thinkers in 200 CE are identical to Hebrew thinkers,
Yeah, but you're just forming all your opinions about the ancient world, and IP's already told us based on what the scholars say.
Well, I know, but
and
see,
as Jay
well,
Denton
the guy
has
had
just
ripped,
said,
the guy
yeah,
had
but
ripped,
the scholars are in on the conspiracy.
Hang on, but the guy had ripped, the guy had ripped on Jones for citing all of these modern scholars, who, by the way, also have way more access to ancient materials, both canonical and then just in the neighboring nations, way more access to put together a coherent understanding of the ancient worldview that is not necessarily the same worldview that you had 300 to 500 years.
Yeah, that's a good point.
After the first century, right? So
to give an example, for example, you're right. I mean, there's so much more context now that modern scholars have that the rabbis didn't have. Like, for Rashi said the god Dagon or Dagon was a fish deity because he connected it to the Hebrew word for fish. We now know from studying ancient texts at Emmer that's just false. He was a grain deity, and pictures of Dagon online are actually pictures of a Apkallu at the temple of Ninurta with like this fish hat on thing. So again, rabbis often made mistakes because they lost the context of the ancient Near East that we now have today thanks to modern archaeology. You can know a lot about, for example, the Jewish feast that the rabbis didn't know about from studying texts at Emmer that Richard Hess highlights in his book. So a lot of this context was lost to them. So that needs to be pointed out, and this is why we need to rely on modern scholars that have this context. The rabbis are still useful, but I mean, let's be honest about what's going on here. The modern scholars have a lot more material they can work with.
And let's be honest that these rabbis in the Talmud don't agree on. I mean, it's all arguing. No. It's all just a bunch of arguments.
Samuel Bar Abba, who said the verse referred to the time when a fold appears beneath the breast. This appears to be a reference to what physicians refer to.
I just got to tell you, I know, we've been laughing about this, and we've already pointed out that this is a horrific thing to be, to still be being argued, I guess. But the thing that I want to say is I've got a 12-year-old at home right now, and I have a 15-year-old at home right now. And if anybody, the notion that anyone who knows 12-year-old girls thinks that this is a potential sexual partner for you, it's sick, man.
Yeah,
that's sick. And this sort of thing just ticks me off. Something fierce. I've got a 12-year-old daughter. You want to think about a 12-year-old daughter as a person for you to experience sexually. This is it's just so sick.
Gross.
Yeah.
And this
Well,
is the depths they're going through. This is the depth they're going to defend child marriage.
There's also a leap here that when it gets into discussing the Talmud, that tells us what they were thinking at their time period. It doesn't tell us what people were thinking when Ezekiel was writing, right? I mean, we already established that. But it does give us an insight to what they were thinking, right? And their debates. And Michael Heiser made the point, he was like, well, the reason why Christians approach the Old Testament different than Jews approach the Hebrew Bible, he said, one time he said, it's fine that they want to sit there and argue with the text and argue with each other over the text and go back and forth and take the text. He says, but that won't do for Christianity, who believes differently about the Bible, which is why Heiser was insisting on, we have to do the most robust form of grammatical, historical, hermeneutics that we can to understand that, because Christianity is not Judaism. We don't have their tradition of going back and forth with the text and disagreeing with the text and all this kind of stuff. But what we're about to read or what he's going to read from the Talmud, that gives us an insight of what they were interested in at the time, trying to be Jews post 70. It doesn't do more than that. But there's also this assumption by him that I want to set this up before you get into it. It's as if, let's say at the earliest, that a woman has completed puberty on the day after her 12th birthday, her breasts are formed, all the pubic hairs there, she's ready to go. He's acting as if day one of being considered a mature woman is wedding ceremony happens instantaneously after that. And that's unrealistic.
Yes, it is.
Just because even if at worst case scenario you could say, well, maybe even though one of the sources concedes there's no approximate age there, they're just guessing. But even if you conceded as early as 12, it doesn't even follow from that therefore 12-year-olds were just en masse getting married the day after their 12th birthday.
All right, let's keep trucking now.
The inframammary fold. According to a 2000 paper in the journal Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, the inframammary fold is detectable.
I never needed to know the term inframammary fold.
Hold on. Look at what this says, though. It begins to define the inferior extent of the breast. Okay, what did the rabbi say? When the breasts have developed so much they begin to sag. So he's citing a paper on the beginning of this process, whereas the rabbis are talking more about this process has gone on for a while.
Yeah. Wow. The places, the subjects that theology takes us to discuss.
The onset of puberty. Thus, the Jewish sages did not think Ezekiel 16 was referring to a time of full development around age 17. But let's say they were wrong, and Jones and his crew of modern eisegesis scholars are right.
No, okay. Again, the scholars who know the languages, who've gotten the degrees, who've written the books, they're all just doing eisegesis, and this guy
and
on
who
the
knew
internet
more about
knows better.
And who knew more about Israel's context than the rabbinic scholars he's going to be citing here soon.
He's been misquoting them at this point. Yeah, so he can't even get his own sources right.
The definition of full development means, and how would it have been known to an ancient audience? Jones also appears to be completely unaware that full development actually occurs only when a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth. Numerous peer-reviewed journals and medical sources acknowledge this. For example, a paper in the journal Martyritis.
So some women never reach puberty? Or never complete puberty? Is that what we're saying? Because puberty is only reached when you're pregnant? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what he's trying to argue.
Is that what he's saying? Surely I'm missing this. IP.
No, that's how bad this is.
No, let's. All right,
you're gonna take up for this.
Well, what he's trying to say is what he goes on to say is, well, here's a study that says breast development isn't fully formed until usually after the first or second pregnancy, and he's saying that. So he goes back and says there are people who couldn't possibly have meant that when they were talking about fully formed if they were virgins and had never had sex or pregnant. That's what he's trying to say
so that's
here.
A little better.
Well, but my point is, when I watch this, is okay. This is a nothing burger. What you're going on here?
Yeah, exactly. And
it's a huge nothing burger that you're trying to pass it off as this has some sort of bearing on any. It's like it's like, what's your point?
Well, from memory,
because when he delivers his point, you're like, and
yeah. Well, I learned something from it in the terminology department.
Well, it's good that you should
that
read
I'm gonna
these studies.
share with my wife
You should
tonight.
read these studies about boobs. That's
Development is a progressive process that begins at the embryonic stage and is only completed at the end of the first pregnancy. This is reiterated by another paper in the Journal of Clinical Anatomy. The authors state that full maturation only occurs during a pregnancy/lactation cycle. And I'm not done yet. Tabor's Cyclopedic Medical Dictionary, a common reference used by medical students, states that it is during pregnancy that hormonal changes lead to complete development of the alveoli of the breasts. Even Cyrannus of Ephesus, whom Jones cited a few times in the debate, was aware of this. According to Paul Newman in his book, Growing Up in the Middle Ages, when discussing the characteristics of a proper wet nurse, Cyrannus advised that she should already have given birth 2 or 3 times so that her breasts were fully developed. So, if Ezekiel 16 was referring to...
Well, that's not what he knew, the same thing as those scientific studies. What he knew is what every man already knew in the history of the planet. You know, after your wife gets pregnant, the boobs get bigger and you're like happy about it. You know,
Jonathan, this is a clinical discussion.
I know, but I'm just saying he's trying to say that what this guy knew is what these scientific that guy knew.
He could open his eyes and look. And
right, it's like, well, those are bigger than they used to be.
Yeah.
And after subsequent pregnancies,
Well, what he's confusing is
I did not open this can of worms. I'm just,
Sorry, IP.
Sorry, IP.
Yeah, he's confusing what puberty does to breasts and then what pregnancy does to breasts. There are different processes here. That should be obvious. And I'll just read from a source I read last time. So this is what it says on page 287. What is the name of this book again? Yeah, Epidemiology of Chronic Disease, Global Perspectives. In both male and females, immature breast tissues develop during embryogenesis in childhood. However, further development and maturation of the breast occurs exclusively in females in preparation for reproduction and lactation. Development and maturation of the human female breast begin at puberty, concurrent with the onset of menarche, usually around 11 to 12 years of age, under the primary influence of ovarian steroidal hormones and the pituitary hormonal prolactation of complex networks of breast lobes, milk glands, and milk duct developments. These glandular structures are surrounded and interlaced by abundant tissue. Mature breast development is typically complete by the age of 17 to 18. Additionally, on page 38 of midwifery and women's health nurse practitioner certification review, they say once again that breast development begins with breast buddings around the age of 9, progresses to conical shape, followed by full development of breasts with round contour around the age of 17. So again, there is a process that is complete with puberty. You have additional development later, but again, what is Ezekiel talking about? It's talking about a time before lovemaking, before sex, before you can get to these additional processes. Just the initial process that we get from puberty. So this Muslim here is confusing. He's equivocating on different processes here. We're talking about what puberty does to girls, and there is a point where that is complete.
Oh my goodness. Let's see what we have here. Kevin says real quick, I tune in and it's just 5 minutes of talk about boobs. Don't get me wrong. I am a man, so I am appreciative of boobs as the next guy, but I just wasn't expecting on this channel. Yeah, this has probably been the most anatomy talk that has happened here in a while. Let's keep trucking.
Development at around age 17, then it will become nonsensical, since how could the girl already be pregnant? That is the time when full mammary development and maturation would occur. This proves that Jones's interpretation is absolutely incorrect. Let's go back to the Jewish sages for the correct interpretation. Barakah 24a.
Let's go back to the Jewish sages
for correct.
Here's the key to the Talmud.
Here's the correct interpretation from a source where they all disagree on the correct interpretation. Okay, so we're not dealing. I mean, okay.
Babylonian Talmud states that the verse
stick with the boobs. He's doing better with the boobs.
Onset of puberty, not its completion. This is reiterated in Kedushin 81b. One last point. Jones maintains that Ezekiel 16:8 means that God passed by the girl at some point after puberty. He only cited a few modern scholars in support, and not one ancient authority.
He only cited a few. Well, it's a live debate. You don't
a
have
bad
time to
argument
cite all
because
your sources, right? That's all I was trying to say.
No,
I don't
I didn't
know.
have time to cite all my sources, obviously.
I
But it's a
it
bad
just,
argument.
like I
Because,
said,
again, I just say the ancient authors are wrong on this. And again, because modern scholars have pointed out, the context shows this is, again, about a period after puberty.
yeah, I'm thinking the context shows, and of course, when you again, it seems like that matches up well with the way that they had it translated anyway when they were dealing with the past time and the present tense when it's just were formed. But I think a lot of it goes, let's go back to the context. It was passing by again a second time. It seems like that's after,
Yes,
in
after
sequence
the
after this
previous
has
stuff.
happened
Yeah.
and completed. And of course, another thing is in this text, I noticed that there's a phrase there, the arrived at full adornment. Some people translate it, reached menstruation. Other people just say at full maidenhood or whatever. The actual word is just ornament of ornaments. And everyone's like, what do we do with this? Right? So it seems like translators are trying to figure out how to translate that phrase. And so whatever that phrase means, we also have to consider. Because they're like, it doesn't make sense in English, and it really didn't make that much sense in Hebrew.
But it could have been a flourish, just like so beautiful, or she's or something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it also might be, I think I was reading the Word Biblical Commentary, and I think they were saying that it also could be, just a scribal fluff up, and it could be other words. So there's like, we don't even know what that phrase really means, but they come to these things that arrived at full adornment or full maidenhood or whatever, because the translators are still at the point that, yes, in the technical commentaries, we don't know what this means, but the consensus is it has something to do with fullness, complete, reached full maidenhood. That's why all the English translations go that, because it's like, well, whatever an ornament of ornaments means, it seems like it makes the best sense out of this whole context, including all those eisegetical scholars that Michael states that this happened after puberty. The reason why they all say that is because it makes the most sense. And
I forgot to read a line from this book on epidemiology. Right after I mentioned mature breast development is typically complete by the age of 17, 18. They then say during the first pregnancy, the milk glands undergo further maturation in preparation for lactation. So they're noting this is a different process. This what he is talking about earlier in his video.
Back to the boobs after talking about the Bible.
The reason is simple.
Miracle of reinterpretation.
No ancient authority would have agreed with this claim. For example, the Christian scholar Origen.
Talking about miracles of reinterpretation, you go to Origen. as Alexandrian as you can get.
There's streams.
I love Origen, by the way. Great read, but I mean,
A lot of
heaps of salt.
The David Wood thing just makes me want to say again about just the timing here. He needs to work on timing, I think, in these videos. IP, you could help him with that. You're excellent on timing. But let's see. Let's go ahead with this. Did you have something else to say real quick, IP?
No, we can continue on. We're almost through
Stated
this
that
one.
God came at the time of puberty, which is when the girl was ready for love and also to be led astray. That is because in Jewish teachings, it is only at puberty that a girl or a boy would become responsible for their actions, such as fornication. It should also be borne in mind that Ezekiel 23 clearly states that the nation of Israel, represented by the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, were already sexually active while in Egypt. This is a metaphor for their idolatry.
This is one of the most interesting verses in the Bible.
This is like the best chapter. You go read to little old ladies at your church when they, it's like.
Yeah, real quick, I do have to say this because I said this to Jonathan on the way back over here. I was like, yeah, but the little old ladies, here's the thing, is the little old ladies in most churches, I think if you got people 50 years old and older, and you said, should the Bible receive a G rating or what rating should it receive? I think most of the people in that church, they might argue between a PG-13 and an R rating, but they've heard from preachers that they've read the Bible themselves. The reason that when atheists come out and they make all these videos and TikTok saying, look, the Bible is so horrible. You're going to read this to your kids. You're going to read this to your kids. The old people, when that person who walked away from Christianity and started making those videos, if they had just listened more, they would have heard all that, because the old people already know that. That's not a shock. They know that they know about onanism. They know about all the violence. They know all this stuff. It's not surprising. The Bible isn't just made for kids.
Well, I'm just saying, whenever in a Southern Baptist church with 200 or fewer people,
Yeah.
right, and they want to get on to you about your potty mouth, you read this.
Read
section.
this one to them.
Right.
Go ahead, IP.
IP. Speaking of
this
potty
is-
mouths, go ahead.
This Muslim is shooting himself in the foot because this passage is about Israel acting sinful. So if they're playing the whore in Egypt in their youth, that's bad. This is not something God is endorsing. Why would you bring this up as if this is evidence that God was okay with youth sleeping around? Like, did you read it? Like, he constantly does this where he takes passages wildly out of the context to support these obscure fringe interpretations.
But he's trying to say that they are, it's whatever you think about what God thinks about this. Clearly, God knows that at this point they have a person has reached sexual maturity if they're able to engage in sex with other people. But that. There's nothing about there's nothing about this that God is like endorsing this, right?
Right. Like you could see like a 14 or 13-year-old, be doing sexual activity they shouldn't do, and we would condemn that. That doesn't mean we would say it they're ready for the age of lovemaking or sex, even though they might be engaging in it. Likewise, God is not saying that, yes, they're clearly okay at the age for lovemaking. So this is a very weird passage to bring up. It's like shooting yourself in the
The
foot.
time period when they entered puberty.
It's like whatting yourself in the foot?
Shooting yourself in the foot.
Shooting. Okay, I just wanted to
Now,
make sure. Yeah.
This doesn't say anything about
Ezekiel
puberty.
16:7 states, their breasts grew. As Greenberg explains, this sinful behavior occurred before marriage. Even though it was wrong, it proves that the girls
Yeah.
are already mature.
Yeah, so he's saying, yeah, it's wrong, but it does show that they were mature. What it shows is that they were capable of technically having sex.
Yeah.
And that's not, but that doesn't mean that's a good thing
And,
that happened.
and neither that
Right.
commentary nor the passage says anything about puberty.
No.
To put it schematically like this. In Ezekiel 16:7, the girl enters puberty. Then God passes by and notices the beautiful pubescent girl.
Okay,
He
well,
then
it's
proposes
begging
marriage.
the question on
This is a
16:7.
metaphor for the Sinai covenant.
Yep.
So, even though the marriage occurred shortly after the girl entered puberty, not when puberty was complete, it still doesn't exonerate the biblical God, because as the Newhart commentary puts it, he was sexually attracted to this girl. In closing,
Notice that Egypt is not mentioned in Ezekiel 16. That's a different analogy. So you're conflating analogies in Ezekiel. Ezekiel uses tons of analogies. They're not all meant to refer to the same processes or same idea. So again, it's like it's a nothing burger.
Yeah, and I don't think he made his case on the onset of puberty as opposed to the completion of puberty.
In order to presume it here.
Yeah, in order to presume it here. There's like, no, that's not, you didn't get there, buddy.
But we did get another Angry Bird picture, and this one it says that he got an F in research.
Dunce.
And he's a dunce,
shucks.
but also very wise and clever. So that's
Yeah. and beat the guy that
if Michael Jones
Yep.
was to be graded on his
Let's entertain these comments real quick.
claims, he would deserve an F. Poor and selective research and a little bit of arrogance and deception are a bad
Okay,
combination.
all right.
The irony, considering what he just did. The
Arrogant.
Poor
irony,
and selective
considering-
research. We're going to go to Talmudic authors. We're going to go to Origin after we make a miracle of reinterpretation joke that I mean, it did not dawn on him that maybe I shouldn't say Origin next. After I mean, I don't know, man.
Well, did you also notice that he's quoting modern scholars, but when I quote modern scholars, well, they're just doing eisegesis. Do you see the double standard he constantly does? Like but you're right. I mean, he put quotes from rabbis on the screen that contradict what he was trying to say. Like, it's just bad.
So we have the Talmud rabbis. We have one semi-modern scholar from the guy that wrote the Yale Anchor Bible commentary, and Origin.
Mm-hmm.
So, bam, Michael. I mean, this is not selective, but everything you said and everything we've said in this
and the
program
Origin
is
one was
obviously
on his point about reinterpretation.
right. I mean, just okay.
Okay,
Folks, if you're convinced that he deserves an F, We do have crayons for the kids' table in the back for you to sit at, and
with construction paper.
yeah, and when you finally reach maturity and stuff, maybe you can come to sit at the grown-ups table and have a conversation about this.